Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So taking out a fun and exciting episode for you guys today because we're doing part 2 of the Llama ITX build, going through some DOS games and showing you how everything works. Because in the first part of this video series, I put together the entire Llama, built it up from scratch, explained all of the components and how it worked. Because this is not FPGA, it's not software emulation, it's a system on module with a CPU that is basically a Pentium MMX class instruction set. So it's like new hardware approximating what the old hardware would do, and it is 100% accurate in that respect. Which is to say, when you actually try to get DOS games to run, sometimes you just have to fight with them for an hour before they do anything. That's not the Itx-Llama's fault, that is just DOS back in the day. If you played games in the early 90s, you'd remember sometimes the setup would take you longer than to complete the actual game. It was an era of computing that I definitely have a lot of nostalgia for, and I am reminded exactly what it felt like to be playing those games back in the day, both for fighting DOS as well as having fun. But honestly, any system that can run Rise of the Triad, one of my favorite first-person shooters of the era of all time, then it definitely has my seal of approval. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But what the Itx-Llama is doing is just running DOS natively, because that's exactly what it is set up to do. You can run DOS on this thing, and you can run Windows 98, and you have to remember all of your DOS prompts because you're going to be running this the exact same way you would back in the early 90s. And just so you know, I'm letting the CPU flex its muscles here. I do have a TNT 2 card installed in the PC, but this is all going through software rendering just so you get a sense of what it looks like without that actual 3D accelerator card, because the first way I played Quake back in the day was on a CPU with no graphics card in it whatsoever, so you are seeing software rendering mode here. And if this video does well and I do a part 3, I'll go over all of the 3D acceleration both in DOS and Windows, because I'm really mostly excited to get this thing into Windows 98 and start playing around with some of those early 3D games I love from PC gaming days. But what I am seeing here is just great. It's Quake running in DOS. The frame rate is good at the standard resolution. Of course, if you tried to crank the resolution back in the day without a 3D card or an OpenGL version of Quake, it would very quickly become a slideshow, and it's no different here because this is still approximating what the CPU would do back when Quake was new. So you're getting a really nice frame rate at the standard resolution. If you jump from there, your results may vary, but of course there is an OpenGL version of Quake on Windows, and we'll definitely check that out in the next episode if it goes that far. But this just feels like being in the 90s again. I remember getting Quake for Christmas one year, and I was absolutely so excited to play the game. I could not wait. This was where the developers of Doom were going into the future as far as first-person shooters were concerned, and seeing this compared to Doom 2, their previous game, was like a night and day difference. And I get that same sense of nostalgia here on the Itx-Llama. Playing Quake, I'm doing nothing but thinking about what I'm doing in the game, and that is the great part about having modern hardware running DOS with period accurate instruction sets. You can just sit down and play it. You're not trying to keep a PC from 30 years ago alive. You're just putting on all modern parts minus the actual 3D accelerator card and 2D card, and just sitting down and playing. I captured this via the RetroTink 4K, the signal ingested perfectly. It was basically like playing a consoleized version of DOS, except you had a keyboard in front of you. And again, if you're rusty on your DOS prompts and you want to use this thing, you're going to have to go back in and Google some of them, because it's going to work the same way it did back in the day. This is not point and click, it is just command prompt like you remember if you were around back then. But jumping over to Doom 2, of course the CPU has enough grunt to run it. You can adjust the frequency in the BIOS settings, but I have this thing running at its stock 500 megahertz speed. You can clock it down if games run too fast, but most games will just basically take as much CPU as you give it and run from there. And of course, this is just Doom 2, and the performance is spectacular here because this is more powerful than the PC I ran it on back when it was new. And to say that people were excited for Doom 2 back in the day would be an understatement. I remember going to EB Games, buying it brand new the day it released, and rushing home because I had to see what was going on with the game, and I was not disappointed whatsoever, nor am I disappointed in its performance here on the Itx-Llama. It is just Doom the way you know, love, and remember it, and with the Sound Blaster support on the board as well, it also sounds exactly like you think it should. But go ahead and listen for 45 seconds, I'll come back and show you more games that I tested on DOS. But enjoy. Sounds like Doom 2 to me, but you let me know what you think down below. And again, this is just the bone stock DOS experience here. It's like going back in a time machine and playing it when it came out, or if you are a vintage PC collector, I'm sure you have PCs hanging around that can do exactly this. But that's why I've been so intrigued by the Itx-Llama, and it's been so much fun to test. I don't have all the space in the world, and honestly, while I love retro PC games, I do not have a big collection of retro PCs. If anything, I've got a decent collection of old power books in my closet because I use them every once in a while for the 3DO M2 SDK, but vintage PC collecting has never been something I super got into, but I love how I can do it in a modern way now. And I remember playing Carmageddon back in the day and just thinking it was the absolute best game I had ever played, and it is kind of funny how nostalgia colors your experiences. I had a lot of fun with Carmageddon here, but I think my kid brain was more enamored by just running people down, running farm animals down, and watching them just turn into a red mist on my screen than I was with the actual gameplay, because I'm reminded here now when I play Carmageddon that really the controls are a little bit wonky, and it is a fun game, but it's not as good as I remember it. And that is the fun thing about taking a nostalgia trip through a certain game from a certain period of time. Maybe sometimes your memories of the game are better than they actually were, and maybe sometimes your memories of the game weren't great and you actually like the game better now than you did back in the day. But that is the fun part about a product like this. You just sit down with it and you basically treat it like it is the early to mid 90s, and you just have fun. And honestly, Carmageddon 2 probably the better game of the two, but I decided to go with the original because it was the one I remember running on DOS. I don't remember if I had Carmageddon 2 for DOS or if I ran it on Windows, honestly. But again, performance-wise here, it's drawing all of the polygons in software rendering. The texturing looks good. The frame rate is solid. Again, this is all just on the CPU that's on the Itx-Llama. I do have a Voodoo 3 card coming for the system. Should be here by the time you watch the video, and that's what I'm going to be using for the majority of my tests. The TNT 2 was just a cheap card to get this thing capturing, but I really wanted to do a Voodoo 3 build because that was the graphics card I wanted back in the day and just never had for my system. And because it is on a lot of Konami's arcade boards, and I love the look of those, it is just sort of a look that I want to complete for this overall build. But again, everything I throw at this, it runs so long as DOS is going to allow it to run. Sometimes you'll download a game and it'll say that there's a file missing. That's the download, not the Itx-Llama. This thing does not hold your hand. It requires you to treat it like you would back in the 90s, and that comes with all of the pitfalls of DOS as well. And every once in a while I hit a game that just doesn't seem to want to do anything, not because the Itx-Llama won't run it, but because it just doesn't seem to want to control. Scorcher here, an absolutely wild arcade racing game that was basically almost a photocopy of something like Ridge Racer, looks absolutely stunning on the Itx-Llama. Everything is running very fast, but once I actually get into a race, for some reason the acceleration key just does not respond whatsoever. And I tried 3 different keyboards, and trust me, that key works in other games, so it just seems to be something with the files on this game that caused me not to be able to accelerate, and that is DOS in a nutshell. It was basically plug and pray back in the day, not plug and play. Sometimes things wouldn't work. Like Blood here, one of my other favorite first-person shooters of the era in the build engine. You can absolutely play the game. It looks spectacular. It sounds good. But no keyboard I own will allow me to turn left and right. I probably just got a bad set of files here, but that's kind of the joke about all of this. DOS was always a very weird beast that would 100% just troll you every once in a while, and as far as Blood is concerned, I could play the game if I could just turn, but I'm sure there's just some weird configuration file I need to alter. But a game I can turn in and has a spectacular soundtrack is going to be Heretic, so go ahead and listen for 35 seconds, and I'll be right back with more. Well, that's just a classic soundtrack, and it sounds incredible coming out of the Itx-Llama sound hardware, and this is a game where I can turn. And the weirdest thing is, both Blood and Heretic and pretty much every other first-person shooter in DOS use the exact same key to turn left and right, so why does Blood not turn? I have no idea, and that is just the charm of DOS. It just does weird things sometimes, and back in the day, you were more than 100% willing to dedicate 2-3 hours to try to fix it as a kid, because you had nothing else going on. But for this capture, I had to move on from Blood, because it was driving me insane. But the Itx-Llama Itx-Llama will basically run any single DOS game you throw at it so long as your files are good and your configuration is correct, which is to say you're definitely going to have to spend some time with your game files making sure everything's set up in the setup correctly and that you actually have good game files in the first place, because that is DOS. It does not hold your hand. You need to tell it how to do everything. There is no troubleshooting whatsoever, and the Itx-Llama 100% completely recreates that. And if it is an era of gaming you love and you were thinking about getting a retro vintage PC, maybe the Itx-Llama would be a good choice for you because it is all modern hardware minus the video card you put on it. And so far I'm having a ton of fun with it. But leave me a comment down below and tell me some games to test in Windows 98, some of those games that have 3D acceleration, because that Voodoo card should be here by now, and I'm going to do another round of testing just to kind of show what Windows 98 does, because that is more my preferred era of gaming even compared to DOS. We'll have to see how it does in there. But short of that, the Itx-Llama has been an absolute blast. DOS fights like it always did, and I'm having a great time. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.